Joining me now is host of Locked On Heat, Wes Goldberg. Let's get into the state of the Heat. Pat Riley held his end-of-season press conference. What were your biggest takeaways from that?
Well, he spent 95% of it talking about how injured the team was all year, right? And I thought it was funny how at the end of the press conference he talked about at the last game of the season he was sipping tequila, just to kind of taking the edge off.
Thought he was a Scotch man, you know?
I did too, you know. But either way, I think that's how we all sort of felt this year. It was just something that we kind of needed to take the edge off because it was a frustrating season. I don't think there was any getting around that for the Heat, not just because they lost in the first round to the Celtics, but because we never really got to see the whole team fully healthy for any sustained period of time. It never really felt like the season even really got started in a weird way because the team was so injured. And he spent, again, 95% of that press conference was, even when he was asked questions about that had nothing to do with availability or health, kind of veering the conversation back in that direction of we just got to get healthy. How do we get our players more available? And how do we get our best players, more importantly, more available going forward?
Speaking of best player, I mean, if we have to look at roster, that is Jimmy Butler, and then we start to see the stats of only 64 games played in a season. What are your thoughts of his availability even this year and what Pat had to say? Obviously, a lot of controversial remarks that went viral, especially with Jimmy saying that if he was playing, that he could have beaten Boston or New York, and then all of a sudden Pat Riley saying, hey, if you're not playing, you need to shut up.
Basically, right? And I think that's sort of the point that he's trying to drive home is we can make these guarantees and we can have these championship aspirations and we could talk about Heat culture and we could paint it on our court and we can print the t-shirts. But if we don't play, we can't really back it up. And it just felt like he had enough of the talk and he wants to finally walk the walk. And he didn't feel like the Heat were able to do that this year. And for whatever reason that is, and he did mention like they got to do a deep dive on some of the health things and their practices and all those kinds of things. But in terms of Jimmy Butler, this is a guy who played 60 games last season and then missed the entire playoffs because of the sprained MCL in his knee. But he's also missed about 20 games a year for his Heat tenure. And Pat Riley mentioned, and I thought this was very enlightening during the press conference, how a year ago he had a conversation with Jimmy Butler and his agent and said, are you going to be more available for us this year? Because it was really cool that we were able to make it to the finals out of the play-in tournament last year, but we're not trying to do that again. That's not the path we want. We got to get out of the play-in tournament. We have to have a better regular season. And apparently Jimmy Butler promised that he'd be more available. And it doesn't really sound like Pat Riley feels like he backed that up. And I think that's why you saw that frustration sort of boil over the way that it did.
And even talking about Jimmy, you know, we start to hear the rumors that he wants that extension, even though Pat did say that he was still under contract. This is obviously our own opinion, but is Jimmy the future, knowing that even last season in Riley's end-of-year press conference, he said, hey, if it's not working, this core, as great as it is, hasn't won anything.
Yeah, I think the Heat would like their future to include Jimmy Butler. And right now, I don't think there's any getting around it. The two sides are just far apart. We heard from Pat Riley during that press conference. They're not in a rush to offer that extension. And so the extension could be about 2 years, $113 million.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It would actually make him the 8th highest paid player in the league 2 years from now.
Wow.
When he's 36 years old. He's going into his age 35 season right now. And they're not obviously in a rush to pay him that money because he wasn't playing enough games. And by the way, like he played 60 games, and I don't think that the feeling is that he was totally engaged for all of those games that he was playing either, right? It was one of his worst seasons in a Heat uniform. So I understand the Heat's perspective of not being in a rush to offer that extension, but Jimmy Butler is, again, going to be 35. You only have so much leverage when you have it, and I don't know that he wants to kick this can down the road and try to negotiate a contract next summer when he's a year older, another year of wear and tear, and who knows what happens next season. Now is the time to make
Get the money when you can.
And so him and his agent are going to go in there and they're going to ask for the max extension. The two sides are very far apart. They want all the money, and they want it now, and the Heat don't really feel like they have to be in a rush to offer him that money because he is technically under contract for at least one more year. And do they find a middle ground, I think, is the big question.
And I think it's interesting to even hear them talk about it, and Pat even being as open as he was, because we always know that he has an interesting agenda, and we don't want to just talk about the negatives, but like, let's talk about the positives. And one thing he did say of Bam's growth as well. What were some of the things that brought you, like even Bam's first season as a captain, and what did you think of him this season? Can he continue to lead this team knowing that, hey, the pieces around him might change?
Yeah, I think everybody, there's just rave reviews for Bam Adebayo, and you talk to anybody in that building, anybody associated with the team, and they go out of their way to talk about Bam. He is the cornerstone of that team. He is the building block. Everything is built on top of Bam Adebayo. He was named the captain for a reason. They love his work ethic. They love everything that he represents. They love the way that He interacts with the fans and the media and the coaching staff and everybody that's a part of that Miami Heat community. And if there is a future, it's Bam Adebayo. And when you start talking about things that the Heat are looking to do as they try to improve this team for next year, it's around Bam. And hopefully it includes Jimmy Butler, but it definitely is going to include Bam Adebayo. And he's also up for an extension. He doesn't have to sign it this year. It's a little bit less of a rush for him. He could sign it next year. But whatever it is and whenever it is, they're going to give it to him, right? There is no question about that.
And even having someone that already signed their contract, Tyler Hero, but obviously it was an up and down season for him. And as much as fans want to see his potential, of course, there's that frustrating playoff performance, which wasn't great. And, this Heat team ended in the first round. What are your thoughts on him knowing that probably in those discussions, again, another offseason where those trade rumors start to fire up?
Yeah, I mean, he's their trade asset in a way, but he's also somebody that they love. Like, they do go out of their way to praise Tyler Hero. They do genuinely love the work ethic, and they're impressed with the work that he's put in. But there are inherent limitations to his game. Defensively, he's only going to be so good. He's a smaller player. Like, there's only so much he can do on that end.
Pat said fragile.
Well, that's the one that's the one that went viral, right? He said, and I'm so glad you brought that up. He said, yeah, Tyler Hero is a little bit fragile. But then he went so far as to say, but those are real injuries. And I thought that was very interesting that he made a point to say that, as opposed to maybe somebody else like Jimmy Butler, who did take took the third season of the regular season off for rest. And I think those are the sort of things that were frustrating Pat Riley about the whole Jimmy Butler experience. But in terms of Tyler Hero, they want to see him succeed. They are upset that it's a broken hand diving for a loose ball in the playoffs last year. It's rushing down the court in a full court situation in New Orleans where he extends the knee, and that leads to a foot injury later on that's sort of associated with it. So I think they want to see him succeed, but I also think that it's they have basically acknowledged that if the right player comes around and they're able to trade Tyler Hero for that player, that they'd be willing to listen. And that's the job of a front office, by the way. I don't think it's anything personal to Tyler Hero. I think they can have both things. But I do you can appreciate the player, but also be willing to trade the player for the right return. But I do think this year we learned what Tyler Hero is, and it's probably not the number one scorer on a high-level offense. We saw that in that Boston Celtics series. Yeah. But he's still a very good player, and I think he could be very helpful for Miami or whatever other team.
If he stays healthy, of course.
Of course.
And last question. Obviously, the Heat have the NBA draft coming up. What are your thoughts in this season? Because we know the best part, I don't know if it's the best part or the worst part of the offseason, where the rumors, the sources, all that stuff. But you covered this team throughout the entire year. What do you think that happens this offseason?
It's a great question. You mentioned the draft. Do they even keep the draft pick, or do they try to include that in some other sort of deal? The young guys, Nikola Jovic and Jaime Jaquez Jr., amazing stories. The brightest of bright spots for the Heat this season, right? If you're looking for silver linings, those are certainly it. Can you move them? Like, we've seen Pat Riley trade young players for veteran instant help win now moves in the past. The whole Jimmy Butler thing is a real saga that people are going to be watching very closely. If people in this market remember, the one guy you thought would never leave, Dwayne Wade, ended up leaving for money. Sorry, I don't need to bring it up.
That was a terrible time.
Yeah, I know. So we in this market are accustomed to seeing it. We should be skeptical and almost even jaded in a sense, because we know it can happen. So there's so many kind of balls up in the air right now that this front office is going to have to juggle, because it might not even be up to them if Jimmy Butler wants to leave. If he's not getting the money from Miami, does he demand a trade? And that kind of takes control out of the front office's hands. So there's just so much going on in terms of what they want to do. I think the number one plan A, go get a star, keep Jimmy Butler happy, keep Bam Adebayo happy, improve the roster in a meaningful way, the way that they've been trying to do over the last couple of years but couldn't. Try to get that done this year and make a run at it next year. But like I said, there's just so many variables. What's
not a variable is a Dwayne Wade statue that's coming this fall. So great stuff from you, Wes. Thank you for joining us today. You can catch his podcast where?
Locked on Heat, YouTube, and wherever you get your